Hi everyone. Today we're going to go through a walkthrough of this article I published recently, which I will link to in the description, where we are demonstrating Materialize by creating real-time views of segment analytics data. So this is a little different than probably the core use case of Materialize, which is where a database like a Postgres or MySQL transactional database would be taking the place of segment, and you would be using change data capture technology like Debezium to stream the changes happening in your database out to a message broker, and then in Materialize you would be creating the real-time views of your database data. But using segment instead of a database here is useful for a couple reasons. It's a quick way to get started with Materialize using real business data. There's a much more involved process required to set up change data capture for your main database where you're piping that into your message broker. So this you can set up if you're already using Segment. You can set this up in about 10 minutes as we'll go through today. And with the type of SQL view that we're going to be creating on the real-time segment data is similar to what you would normally create in your data warehouse once you've batched the segment data in. So in this case, what we're going to be demonstrating is we have a website and it is sending A/B test experiment analytics events to segment, and then we're enabling the Kinesis destination from segment so that all of the events are forwarded immediately to Kinesis. And that's AWS's fully managed version of Kafka. And then Materialize is connecting and reading from the Kinesis stream, and we can write SQL there that is basically joining and filtering and aggregating segment data in the exact same way that you would if it was in a data warehouse. But in this case, the data is coming through in real time and the output is being updated and maintained in real time. Okay, so let's get right into it. I've already got a segment project set up where I have a JavaScript source, which just means I've got a JavaScript analytics tag here that will allow me to send events into this source. And if I go over to my code pen, which is taking the place of my website today, where instead of having a full website here, I've just got that JavaScript function that is going to send a bunch of experiment viewed and experiment clicked events into segment. So if I start sending events and then I go over to this debugger view in segment, you can see them coming through. So that's great. And now I want to enable the Kinesis destination, which will allow me to forward all of those analytics events to Kinesis. So I do that in the segment interface first. And once it's set up, or in order to set it up, I need 4 configuration fields. The first one, the AWS region, I know my AWS account defaults to US East 1, so I'm going to set that. And then these remaining 3, I need to go over to the AWS console and first create a Kinesis data stream. So Kinesis, the way they're sort of unit of scale are shards, and the limits of one shard are 1 megabit per second or 1,000 data records per second, which is more than enough for most segment use cases. So I'm going to create a Kinesis data stream, and then I'm going to copy the ARN of the stream so that I can use it later when we are creating the access policy, and then also when we're connecting to it for Materialize. And then I'm going to go over to the identity access management console in AWS, and I'm going to create a policy that I'm actually just going to reference the segment Kinesis docs, and they've got the template for the access policy available here. And this is going to give segment's account just enough access to send analytics events to my Kinesis stream. So the only thing I have to change here is the ARN that we copied earlier. And then I'm going to name this, create the policy, and I'm going to create a role where I say allow another AWS account segments, which they give the ID of their AWS account in their docs. So we're going to allow segments AWS account to have access to write to our Kinesis stream. And the one little gotcha here is they ask you in the docs to put as the optional external ID the source ID of your segment source. So I'm going to copy that, and that's available on, if you go to sources, settings, API keys. So we're going to use that, and then we're going to add the policy we just created. And all we need now is to go to that role we created, copy the ARN, and that is the second config field that segment needs. And then the next two we already have. So the source ID is what we're using as a secret. And then the stream name I just called skim for segment Kinesis Materialize. And I think we have everything we need, and we can turn on the destination, and then we can actually test it out in their event tester, where we can click send event, and hopefully we should see, yep. So a segment was able to send into our stream. And so now we're done with that side of the work. And we now need to go and set up Materialize to read from or consume from the stream. So I'm using Materialize Cloud, but this should work just as well if you're using an instance of Materialize running locally or self-managed. And I'm going to start spinning it up. This should only take a minute or so. And while that's spinning up, I'm going to create a policy and a user to allow Materialize to access the stream. So for the policy, I've actually got the JSON written out in this post. And really what it's doing is it's giving Materialize list and read access to, in this case, all of my Kinesis streams. You could just as easily put the exact address, but I'm going to use all of them. And then I'm going to name the policy. And instead of creating a role, I'm creating a user for Materialize, which will have programmatic access using that policy I just created. And once the user is created, I take the access key ID and I want to save that. And then I take the secret key and I want to save that because I'll need it in order to connect from my Materialize instance. So now I go back to cloud and my instance is healthy and I can click connect. And in order to connect, I need to download some certificates. And what I'll be doing to connect to Materialize here is using pSQL, the Postgres command line, to connect as if it were a Postgres database, but really it's Materialize. So in order to do that, I'm going to first change directories into the directory where the certs are, and then I'm going to run the connection command that I have in the cloud, and boom, I'm into Materialize. So now if you read through the post, the way that you start using Materialize is with SQL statements. The first thing I need to do is use this SQL statement to create a source that tells Materialize we're going to be connecting to and reading from Kinesis stream with this address and key and ID. So I will paste in the specific ARN and access key and ID here. So I've got my ARN, access key, and secret key. And now if I write show sources, we can see we've got our Kinesis source in Materialize, but nothing has been processed yet because this is more of just a config that we will use later when we create a materialized view. So the next few steps are taking what comes in as raw bytes and casting them to a format that we can actually use as if it were SQL columns. So the first one, this is a view and not a materialized view. And so that just means that nothing is going to be maintained here. There's no events that are going to be processed in. This is more of almost just a SQL template that I will reference later in my materialized view. And it could have been a subquery, but this keeps things a little bit more organized. So that's the first step, which is casting to JSON. And then the next two views are taking specific events that are coming through the experiment viewed one in this case and pulling out 5 attributes that are nested in this JSON object and casting them to strings to use as columns. So we've got one for experiment viewed, and then we've got another very similar one for experiment clicked. And now when we write show views, we have those 3, let me reposition this. We have those 3 views, but we couldn't write something like select star from, this kind of thing would not work because these are not materialized views, they're just views. And so no work is being done as a result of creating them. And that's our next step, is to create a materialized view where all of the magic is happening. And in this view, if you look at it, what's happening is we are taking the experiment clicked and experiment viewed tables that we created earlier, or views, and we're aggregating by unique anonymous IDs and by just total account to bring together a summary table of results of and counts of these experiment viewed and experiment clicked events. So as soon as I create this, now Materialize gets to work consuming from the Kinesis stream all the events it can find and running them through a data flow to create and maintain a table of experiment results that we've defined. So if I do select star from experiment results, I won't get an error, but I probably won't get any rows yet because I turned off my events here. But if I go back and let's set this to be much faster. So we're going to do 100 events per second, and we're going to start sending them through. And if we go back to our debugger view, we should be able to see them coming through very fast. And then if we go all the way back to Materialize, we can start to see the results being created or aggregated here and updated in real time. So let me actually try something here. So I don't know what'll happen, but if I refresh this, oh yeah, lots of events. So there's really no segment account that is going to be pushing the limits of what Materialize can ingest in terms of throughput. There's other users of Materialize in the finance world that are processing like 60,000 events per second. So this should hopefully give you an interesting way of using Materialize, getting a feel for it, and seeing what's possible with it. And I think there are some interesting directions you can go from here. For example, you can imagine what would be more useful is if you could take the data that you're getting in the segment and join it with your application or your platform data in real time as well. And that's where Materialize is very good at taking in a change feed of changes from a database. And what you would do is set up change data capture from your primary database and define a second source in Materialize that's pulling that data in. And then at that point, you could write a new SQL view that is joining your segment data with your platform data, and you could start to do some really interesting stuff. The types of stuff that you would otherwise only be able to do in your data warehouse. And by moving it up closer to where the data is created, I think there's two benefits. One is it's simpler, and then the other, there's more new possibilities that are created when you know the data is live and available or updated in real time. So I hope that gives you some ideas of how to use this, and I'm interested to hear if you use it on a bigger segment account where you have lots of different data, how the experience goes, because as you can see right now, I'm just using a test account, and so I think there's probably some interesting findings from using it on a much more mature, large-scale segment account. All right, thank you.